Hello, welcome to Inside the Tape for their second episode with Clay Harbor and Greg Cosell. I'm former Eagles tight end, and I'm excited to be joined by, as always, Greg Cosell. We're still bringing you this new podcast on Inside the Birds. We're examining the tape. We're excited to be working with Adam Kaplan and Jeff Mosher and the family Inside the Birds all season long. So, without any further ado, let's get into it, because I know I want to hear what Greg saw. You want to hear what Greg saw. I'm going to put my input in there, too, as a former player. Greg's a tape expert, breaks down all the tape, all the games. It's what this guy does. So let's get started, Greg. I don't know where you want to start on this Minnesota game. We're going to start Minnesota. We're going to finish with Tampa Bay. But I'll let you kind of pick where you want to get started at for as far as Minnesota, and I'll just chime in based off of where you start us at here. So go ahead, Greg.
I've been so excited, Clay, to talk about this game because, you know, one of the things that it's hard to notice adjustments, even when you watch tape like I do, because as you know, adjustments can often be just so minor. It could be, hey, you line up a stack backer 1 yard one way or the other. You know, those things are really important to coaches and players. But, you know, they're really hard to see. And because even when I watch tape, I don't know the whole game plan all week. I'm not in those meetings. But sometimes adjustments are vivid and clear. And I got to tell you, when you play, and you know this, a Brian Flores defense, he's with a new team. There'd only been one game. You really have no idea what you're going to get from Brian Flores. You have no idea because he's done everything in his career. Yeah. So you have to sort of let the game happen for a number of series and then try to get a feel for what he's doing. Yeah. And in that game, he started out being super aggressive. He blitzed on, I believe, the first 5 or 6 plays of the game. So now you're thinking, okay, the game might be like that. And then all of a sudden that stopped. And he basically played a 5 across shell in the secondary. That's basically the approach he took for the rest of the game.
What was that?
I know, but the point is so now you have 5 across. They're not really run defenders. They're too far away really to be true run support players, primary run support players, as you know. So now you're dealing with 6-man fronts. And what are the Eagles' strength? An offensive line. So Brian Johnson, their new OC, he sees this, and you know what he says? He says, this is now not a Jalen Hurts game. This is a run game. We have the best offensive line in football. We're going to line up, and we're going to run the ball because they're playing with 5 defensive backs, a good 12, 15 yards from the line of scrimmage, and we're just going to run inside zone until they make a change. And you know what? They didn't make a change. So they stayed with the run game, and they just dominated. And I thought Swift did such a good job with being patient, showing vision. You know the old John Wooden line, the old basketball coach, be quick but don't hurry. You know, the old cliche, speed. It's not speed to the hole, it's speed through the hole. You know, all those cliches, but Swift did that. And they just dominated up front, and it didn't need to be a Jalen Hurts game. As you well know, there's only a certain number of games in the NFL. The goal is to win each week. The goal is not to pad statistics or to make one player look good at the expense of others. The goal is to win the game, right? They won the game.
To win the game. Hello, Herm Edwards.
And I thought that what Brian Johnson did was absolutely brilliant. And anybody who thinks otherwise thinks, oh, well, what's wrong with Jalen Hurts? You know, obviously the interception he threw was a bad one. You know, he just obviously was 3rd and 16. They played a loose cover 2. You know, only he could tell you why he threw it. I can't. He obviously didn't read it properly.
I think 2 guys could have picked that one off.
I would agree. Yeah, the underneath defenders, the hook defenders in cover 2, because it was 3rd and 16, got tremendous depth because so what if he throws a 6-yard ball? But the point is he throws that pick. And then when Brian Johnson saw what Brian Flores was doing, he said, you know what? Let's line up and run the ball. And then if they stop that, change up, then we have other things in our arsenal. But they didn't need other things in the arsenal. That's the way the game played out.
Absolutely. And no, I agree with you. Very interesting. I mean, you basically said it. Greg, like I'm watching this tape and I go, what is this coverage? It's
Yeah.
a 5 across shell. It's literally, it's like this iron dome right here, 5 across shell. It's not a cover 2. It's not a cover 3. I didn't know what they were doing. At one point, they're rushing 3 a lot.
Yep.
They did start blitzing. But you're rushing 3. You got 3 defensive linemen on the field, and the Eagles made, they made the adjustment, like you said, and they were able to start pounding the rock, relying on those big guys. I thought Goddard did a good job blocking. So even the tight ends, and early in the game, I felt like you saw the RPOs, and even though they had some numbers, they would throw the screen. But it wasn't working, the perimeter blocking for whatever reason. Yep. So they just took that option out. We're not even going to do the RPO.
And it wasn't until Clay, it wasn't really until late third quarter, early fourth quarter that the Vikings kind of decided, okay, we've had enough. So now they started to play with their 5-2 front, which is to defend the run. But that was really late third quarter, early fourth quarter, when the flow of the game had kind of been dictated already. And it's funny. You watch the game on TV, and I'm sure a lot of people thought, hey, Jalen's not playing great. There's no really big – obviously, he hit the 2 big plays to Devonta Smith. The first one was, a good throw and catch. The second one, there had to be a bust somewhere along the line. I think I know what it was, but without going too deep into the weeds, people, they may not be able to – they can't see it. So, I won't go into the details. But I thought Hurts and the Eagles offense played to the Vikings defense. The Vikings defensive game plan, once the game settled in, was to minimize and take away explosive plays in the pass game, because I think they're a little uncomfortable with their corners right now. So once I watched the tape, I actually thought Hurts, other than the interception, I thought he played with patience, and the OC Johnson called the game based on what the Vikings defense was showing him. That's good football. That's good play calling.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And I think that the second big play, the touchdown to Devontae, that was just Harrison Smith bust, right? The cornerback was expecting help.
Here's what I thought. I'll try to map it out so people can understand it. I actually thought they rushed 5 D linemen on that play. It was 3rd and 4. And I thought, and Hicks, who we know well, Jordan Hicks, very good players, had a heck of an NFL career. He added in as the 6th rusher, and I think he made a mistake. And so what I think happened is, I think Smith, because it was 3rd and 4, I think Smith saw I think it was the tight end. I think Smith saw that the tight end was now releasing totally free. And because it was 3rd and 4, not 3rd and 12, I think Smith was trying to compensate for Hicks's mistake. And the corner, who was Evans, expected Smith to be deeper and giving him inside help. But Smith vacated because I believe, I could be wrong, I believe that he was compensating for the mistake that Hicks made.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense, because Harrison Smith is one of those veteran guys. You don't see him make mistakes like that. I know it's a new defense for him, but he's a smart player. He's known to be a reliable guy. So let's make the move from bright spot for the Eagles. Obviously, the run game. Great job there. Like you said, I didn't even mind Jalen Hurts' game either. People are upset he didn't have 300 yards and throw a bunch of touchdowns to A.J. Brown and Dallas Goddard. He played the game that was in front of him. But this pass defense, had some ups and downs here. Do you think this is an issue? What are you seeing on tape? Why the Eagles are struggling so much against the pass right now? Kirk Cousins' stat line, he was 31 for 44. He had 364 yards, and some of these yards were at the end of the game. We can say that when the game was out of reach a little bit. 4 touchdowns with an 83 QBR and a 125.6 rating. Justin Jefferson had 11 for 159. Jordan Addison had 3 for 72, and TJ Hawkinson had 7 for 66 and 2 touchdowns.
Yeah. I would say of his stat line, the one that would be concerning going forward, and again, it's early in the season. You have plenty of time to correct things, and we know Bradbury didn't play, although I thought Josh Jobe, and we can get into that real quick, but I thought he played well. But the one that would probably be most concerning was the 3rd down. Cousins was 7 for 10 for 145 yards and a touchdown, and the most important part of that was 6 of the 7 3rd down completions resulted in 1st downs. So that's the important part. So, that is something that needs to be better. Just being honest, that needs to be better. But I thought Josh Jobe played really well. Obviously, he got beat on the touchdown to Addison. I thought that was the only play where I felt okay, but he's a physical, competitive, swagger type corner. He's a different player than Bradbury, which raises the question, with Maddox out for the season, who's going to go in the slot? Obviously Goodrich came in that game. You wouldn't say he played a particularly good game, if you're being honest, looking at the tape, and that's what I do. So the question is we now go forward and Maddox is done for the year, how does Sean Desai and the coaching staff see the slot corner position? Do they feel like someone like Bradbury as a big slot? Can he play in there? It's a totally different guy than Maddox, and leave Jobe outside. Do they feel that there's someone else who can play in the slot that's presently, on the roster? I don't know the answer to that, but I'm very curious to see, Clay, what they do on Monday night.
I think people in Philly are going to realize what they had in Avant Maddox.
Yeah.
Maddox, I know he's a guy that doesn't stay healthy all the time, but when he is out there, he's a top 5 slot defender.
He's a real, and he's physical and aggressive. He's not just a pass defender.
For his size, he plays in the run game.
Yeah,
he is a huge asset to this team. According to Next Gen Stats, last season he was 3rd in EPA per play allowed, the 3rd lowest in the entire NFL. This guy plays well in the run game, graded as a top 5 PFF slot defender against the run. Avant Maddox, I love everything about it. Besides, obviously, he's small of build and he throws his body around so much that he struggled to stay healthy. And then I will talk about this later. We got the Bucs coming in. Curtis Godwin spends about half the time in the slot. I think a little less this year. So who are we going to match up with him? But I think Jobe played well. Like you said, obviously Jordan Addison beat him on that touchdown. But for his first start, going out there, I thought he did okay. I thought Slay actually got beat up a little bit by Justin Jefferson. And, you saw that, and that's something you're not used to seeing.
I'm glad you said that, because I thought Jefferson, for the most part, got the better of that. Not that he killed him. It's not like he had all of his catches against Slay, obviously.
Yeah.
And that's why that part of it wouldn't worry me as much, because look, Mike Evans is a great receiver, and he's their boundary X predominantly for the Bucs, meaning he lines up as the single receiver to the short side of the field, the boundary side of the field, predominantly, not 100% of the time. And Slay may match up to him as well. But, when you have your best corner playing against the other team's best receiver and he gets beat once in a while, you know what? As you know, it's the NFL. Sometimes that happens. You can't necessarily view that as, oh, my God, the defense is no good now. Slay is still going to play, and he's still going to line up and match up at times to the other team's best receiver. You hit on a great point, though, which is worth talking about. This year, Chris Godwin, last year, just to step back, last year, he led the NFL in targets and receptions out of the slot. This year, he's actually lined up outside more than the slot. So we'll see but he's certainly capable of going in the slot if the Bucs feel that that's where the better matchup takes place. So that's an unknown as you and I speak right now.
And that's what I think is going to happen, because you look at the tape, you see Maddox out. I think it's going to be a huge day of Godwin in the slot. And we'll talk about that more after we wrap up this Minnesota game here next couple of minutes. So I want to get your take. We were worried. Me and you were worried a little bit because Nakobe Dean, we thought, played well in the first game. We thought the linebackers, held their own. But Nakobe Dean's on IR right now. So we go, okay, so in step Nick Morrow. So how do you feel like the Eagles linebackers did throughout the game? Obviously I don't think they played a perfect game. I think Zach Cunningham had did some good things. Nick Morrow did enough to get the job done. How do you feel about the Eagles linebackers did, compensating for Nakobe Dean not being there?
And this plays to your point. I think Cunningham is a really good run player. I think he's got great length, size, athletic movement traits. That's always been his strength. As you probably know, when he was in Houston, he was among the league leaders in tacklers for a number of years. I think he's a really, really good run defender. Despite his size and his length and his movement, I don't think he's a particularly good pass defender.
Yeah.
And I think, that again, depending on who the opponent is, that could be an area of concern. You know, and I'm being honest, Nick Morrow didn't stand out to me one way or the other, which is probably good. You know, I wasn't studying him in detail on every snap, but he didn't stand out to me in the sense, oh man, he's just not playing well. You know, I thought he played fine. You know, I mean, did he make impact plays? No, but the way the Eagles play defense, normally that position is not necessarily going to make impact plays, certainly not in the pass game.
I'll tell you what, being a guy that covers some of the Chicago Bears, he definitely looks a little bit better behind that Eagles defensive line than he did behind that Bears defensive line last year.
Everybody does.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, incredible. And then before we move on, we got to talk about the defensive line, and I want to see how you felt they did, you know, against, we said it. Here was one of our keys of the game. The D-line had to show up. They had to make Kirk uncomfortable. And, you know, they had to force a turnover here or there. So how do you feel like the defensive line played in the game?
Well, yeah, and obviously they played the run exceptionally well, and it was clear the Vikings, you know, they got behind a bit. They kind of abandoned the run anyway, but it's very hard to run against the Eagles. You know, and there was a lot of quick game throws, and I know Kirk's numbers were really good, but he's a professional quarterback. He gets rid of the ball within the timing and rhythm of the pass game. He normally doesn't sit in the pocket, you know, for a long time. You don't usually get late in the down with Kirk in the pocket. You know, and I thought in this game, you know, the Eagles, they didn't feature much pressure in this game. You know, they didn't feature many 5-man pressures with second and third level defenders. They played only one snap of zero coverage, and that came on the Hockenson 5-yard touchdown, which in the red zone, everything changes anyway, as you know. So this was a coverage game for the Eagles. They played a ton of split safety. They played 2-man, which is split safety, but it's man, obviously. So, you know, they had some good rushes, and they had some that, you know, that weren't so great. But you know, I didn't feel like their D-line was a problem at all. I mean, their D-line is going to be a factor every week, and we'll get to that for this matchup with the Bucs, but their D-line is really good, and it's going to be an important part of who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I agreed. Jalen Carter was ranked as the top-ranked rookie in the league for the second consecutive game. I thought Jordan Davis played well against the run. Thought Milton Williams had some nice plays. Those interior defensive linemen, they just all keep showing up, man, and they just know how to play the game. And you know, from here, I think we're about halfway through, so I think it's time we move on to what Monday Night Football and what turned out to be a big game. These are two 2-0 teams.
Hey.
I think people expected the Eagles to, but who expected the Buccaneers post Tom Brady, Baker Mayfield to be 2-0? Coming into Monday Night Football, we got a doubleheader. Eagles are the first of 2 games. I'm excited for this game. I know the Eagles are favored, but Baker Mayfield's completed 76% of his passes. Okay, the Buccaneers got the second best rushing defense in the league, only behind the Eagles. I think this is, you know, their D-line's good. They have 8 sacks for the Buccaneers, 8 sacks so far.
Yeah.
7 different players have a sack. I think there's some interesting matchups to cover. And just an interesting game. What's the first thing that jumps out at you, Greg, looking forward to this matchup against the Buccaneers?
Well, there's really 2 things, one on each side, but let's take one at a time. You know, we only have 2 games, but that's what we have right now, Clay, right? We have 2 games. You know, they have a new offensive coordinator, Dave Canales. Okay, he came from Seattle, and where he worked with Shane Waldron, who was the offensive coordinator in Seattle, and Shane Waldron came from Sean McVay. So Dave Canales has a lot of that in his background. And what really stands out when you look at this pass game through 2 games, number 1, protection first. They make sure that they protect Baker Mayfield. And why do they do that, Clay? Because Mayfield at his best, and, you know, I know a lot of people don't like him, and that's irrelevant, but at his best, he is a timing rhythm player. He needs to hit his back foot and get rid of the football. The longer he is in the pocket, the less comfortable he is. So you need to put together an approach and a philosophy that allows him to be efficient, getting rid of the football within the timing and structure of your play design. And that starts with protection. So, and that's what's happened through 2 weeks. He's been, for the most part, a comfortable player, and therefore He's not getting frenetic in the pocket. He's not getting reckless in the pocket. He's able to deliver the ball with timing and anticipation. You know, people may forget that guy was the #1 pick in the draft. He throws a good ball, Clay. It's not like the guy has no talent. You know, obviously, there's been so many other factors that had made people think that Mayfield's no good. But I've talked to coaches who coached him, and they actually really like the kid. They say, you know, he's not like what he is doing all the other stuff, as is often the case, as you know, with professional athletes. You meet them off the field or, well, excuse me, when they're at work, and they're different from the way people think of them. But as I said, it's 2 games. Maybe this is the game the Eagles D-line dominates, because the O-line for the Bucs is a bit of a concern for sure. It's a work in progress. But through 2 games, this past game has been very timing, rhythm-based, and Mayfield has been delivering the football with precise ball location.
Yeah, and I think you look at the first thing that jumps out to me about Baker Mayfield is he has no turnovers.
No,
the Buccaneers altogether, that was usually his Achilles heel, was him turning the ball over for the 3rd time in franchise history through the first 2 games. The Buccaneers have no turnovers through the first 2 games, and the Eagles, the Bucs are +5. The Eagles are +4. They're both in the top 5 in turnover differential. So I think that's going to play a role. Who takes more care of the ball? But getting into some matchups now, I think we alluded to it a little bit earlier. You know, the matchups that kind of make me nervous because we don't know who's going to be healthy. You know, is our cornerback going to be back? Is he still banged up? Concussion protocol? Is Reed Blankenship, is he going to be feeling better? I know we got the long extended time to try to get some of these guys healthy. But Mike Evans, Chris Goddard, both these guys can play. They've shown it year after year, game after game. You saw what Mike Evans did against the Bears last week. Listen to this. 6 catches for 171 yards and a touchdown, averaging 28 yards per catch. Chris Godwin, 5 catches for 58 yards, and they found themselves a decent little tight end. Cade Otton, 6 catches, 41 yards, and they had a decent run game. Rashad White, 73 yards and a touchdown on 17 carries. Yeah, so let's start there.
And they're trying to stay balanced
with these receivers.
Yeah, they're trying to stay balanced. That's a significant part of what Dave Canales is doing. We'll see if that works against the Eagles. It's tough to run against them. But they also have a rookie wide receiver, and he's not going to be a volume target. His name's Trey Palmer. He comes from Nebraska, and he can run. He's a track guy, which means that you have to be concerned about him getting over the top of your defense. Now, like I said, he's not going to get 10 targets. He's not going to go off, 8 for 170. But, it doesn't take that. You just have to, as you know, being a tight end and an offensive guy, when you have speed on offense, that means the defense has to play certain formations differently because they cannot get beat over the top. And it'll be interesting to see if they take a few shots early to attack, even if Blankenship is back. And I really like Reed Blankenship as a player, but he's certainly not an explosive, sudden athlete, just, as an athlete. So it'll be interesting to see if they take some shots early to try to test Blankenship and Evans on the back end and see how they react. But, as we said earlier, Godwin is not just a slot receiver now, but he could be in this game. I guess we'll see how that plays out. The only thing that's different, let's say from the Vikings, is Otton's a solid player at tight end, but he's not really a seam stretcher. He's not that kind of tight. Now, that doesn't mean he can never do it, Clay. You know about tight ends better than I, but he's not really an explosive mover that you think of as, he's going to run the seam and beat you, on those kinds of routes.
No, watching the Bears game, I do a lot of Bears stuff, and watching the Bears game, he was a guy that is a possession type tight end, and TJ Hawkinson last week, he showed off some moves. I think he made a couple of the Eagles defensive backs look pretty bad in a couple of guys.
That move he made on Evans, like I don't foresee Otton doing that. I mean, I'm not saying I hate you know as well as I do. In football, you never say something's 100% and you never say something is never. But I mean, Otton is not that kind of athlete.
No. The move Hawkinson put on Evans, that's not going to, it's most likely not going to happen. But same thing with you. I'm curious who's, with Avant Maddox out. I'm a little bit worried about that. that slot defender if they move him in there, which I think they might. And I'm also, if Bradbury's not back, I'm a little worried about, like you said, you brought up Trey Palmer's a guy that can run. They got deep wide receiver core, so that'll be interesting. So moving from the receiving side of the ball, staying on defense for the Birds. I know they've been great against the run. They have the best rushing defense in the league this year. How do you feel about them stopping the run this week? Do you think this offensive line versus defensive line is going to fare?
I think they'll stop the run. Again, like I said, is it possible one run breaks? Sure, that can always happen. But I don't think that the Bucs are going to sustain offense and eat up clock and control the pace and tempo of the game running the football. I don't see that happening. So, I think it ultimately comes down to how Dave Canales wants to call the game. Because there's always two ways to go when you call a game with a quarterback like Baker. Because Baker's not really he's not a second reaction playmaker. He's a rhythm quarterback, and he's 6 feet, so he needs to see. So the question is, do you try to sustain offense by trying to run the ball, or do you just try to sustain offense by throwing on first down? Those kind of short, quick passes that, get you to 2nd and 4 in an ideal world. So you have to decide what the balance is offensively there between running enough because it's important to your offense, but also understanding that you might not have great success doing it. So what's the balance? That I always find that a hard question for an offensive coordinator and an offensive staff to figure out.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there, and I think they'll do a good job. The one matchup I'm really looking forward to is Matt Filer.
Matt Filer.
Filer versus Jalen Carter. I mean, we got a vet. Guy's been there, done it, can play. And then we got Jalen Carter, this new rookie coming in, tearing up the league. So I'm curious to see how that one shakes out. I think from what I've seen, I think Jalen Carter can get the better of him just because he's so quick off the ball and elusive. And, I mean, he is a big, powerful guy, but I think Jalen Carter can really get the better of him. How about pass rush? Last week, the Bucs only gave up 1 hurry. But I think the game told a little bit different stories. The Bears were able to flush Baker here or there. He made a couple of throws on the run. He got past he didn't give up any sacks, but he got past the, 1 or 2 yard gain on some quarterback scramble. So you think the Eagles can do something the Bears couldn't and maybe get a couple sacks here on Baker?
Yeah, for sure. And I think you need to get bodies around Baker for sure. I mean, because the reality is with Baker, the longer that he's in the pocket, the less comfortable he gets. You see his feet start to get jumpy. He loses his base. His mind starts to work too fast. He kind of loses clarity, Clay, of what he's seeing. You got to get people around him. And keep in mind, he's only 6 feet. So you start to get big bodies around him, and there's things he cannot see. So I think they can put that kind of pressure on him. And, of course, now, then it gets down to situational football. Obviously when it's 3rd and 9, hey, you can pin back your ears, you can rush the quarterback. The question is, can the Bucs, and every offense wants to do this, not specific to the Bucs, but can they stay on schedule enough that they can be proactive in how they run their pass game? In other words, more quick rhythm throws as opposed to having Baker have to take deep 5 and 7 step drops because it's 3rd and 9 or 3rd and 11.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then let's go the opposite side of the ball. How do you feel about the Eagles? Like, can they protect Hurts? This is a team, like I said, they had 8 sacks by 7 different players. This is a team that can actually pressure the quarterback. They got a good defense. Shaq Barrett had an interception for a touchdown. He had a sack last week. I'm looking at him versus Lane. Obviously, we all know what Lane Johnson can do, but Shaq Barrett versus Lane Johnson's one of the matchups I'm looking at. I think Lane will get the better of him there. But how do you feel as a whole? Anything that scares you up front about the Bucs defensive line versus the Birds O-line here?
I think, Clay, this is schematic. I mean, obviously they've got some really good players. Vita Vea, I think Joe Tryon's very good. But when you look at the history of Todd Bowles, and it's true again this year, it's high percentage pressure. And it's a certain kind of pressure. As you know, there's man pressures where you blitz and you play man coverage behind it. And there's zone pressures where you blitz and you play sort of zone match principles behind it. It's not true man. And Bowles is a master at blitzing with zone pressure and playing kind of zone match coverage behind it. And he's so good understanding your protections, breaking down your protections with how his front initially looks, and then overloading where he knows you're weak based on how he studied your protections. And that's something you really have to be aware of when you play the Bucs. So it's not, are there always one-on-one matchups? Of course there are. But I think you have to be aware of just those kinds of pressures. I mean, they had a sack week 1 against Minnesota, which was beautiful. Winfield got a sack and a forced fumble, and it was a classic Bucs zone pressure, and Winfield ended up getting in clean because the protection, no one technically made a mistake. The protection just couldn't handle it. So those are the kinds of things you have to really study and be aware of when you play a Todd Bowles defense.
Okay, and then now let's look at this defensive backfield versus the Eagles pass catchers. And the one I like is Dallas Goddard versus Devin White. Tampa gave up 12 receptions to the Bears and the Vikings tight ends. I think maybe Dallas Goddard game maybe we could see some of that, I think that there could be some availability there. Do you think that AJ Brown, do you think that obviously Devontae Smith can have a big game this week, or do you think it's going to be more of a grind amount type run game we had last week against the Vikings?
I think it depends on one thing. Last week Carlton Davis did not play. And I don't know, as you and I talk on a Wednesday evening, so I want people to understand when you and I are talking, he's got a toe injury. Toes can be tricky. So I think that if he does not play, it would not surprise me if the Eagles felt that they could work outside the numbers very effectively in this game.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they never would if Davis plays, but Davis is a quality corner. And by the way, he actually was matched up versus Jefferson. When they played week 1, they used him as a matchup corner. He's a big physical quality NFL corner. So I think much depends on his availability. If he's not out there, I would think the Eagles would believe, Clay, that they can work outside the numbers and do some damage.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Carlton Davis. And I've had surgery on my toe. I've had turf toe. Even when you are back, that affects you the first few weeks, getting used to it, getting the strength back. So that toe's a big deal.
Yep.
So let's wrap it up with this, Greg. Just like last week, I want to get your prediction. Do you think the Eagles leave this game 3-0, or do the Vikings, or do the Buccaneers leave this game 3-0? And do you think maybe this could be a matchup that we could see again a little bit down the road and maybe the playoff time?
My tendency right now would be to believe that the Eagles would win this game. I think that their D-line can dominate an O-line that's a little bit of a work in progress right now. And I think they can get some pressure on Baker. They can get him a little jumpy in the pocket. Again, that doesn't mean he's going to throw 3 or 4 picks, but I think that they can bring down his efficiency clearly. I don't think the Bucs will be able to be as balanced against the Eagles front as they would ultimately like to be, and that it will end up being a little bit more of a throw ball game for them. And I think that the Eagles O-line can handle the Bucs D-line. Again, doesn't mean there won't be a bad play here and there. It's the NFL. You know that. That's the way it works. But I think overall, I think they can handle the Bucs. And again, they're on the road. Who knows what the score is? It could be, you just don't know those things. But I would tend to think that the Eagles have some matchup advantages that would work in their favor, with the only caveat being the potential secondary concern. If indeed, Baker can hit Godwin or Evans on big, long, big plays. That change, you know how that is. You could feel you played a great game, but if you give up 3 50-yard, touchdowns, all of a sudden, where'd the game go? So that would be the only caveat.
Yeah, I'm with you, Greg. I think the Eagles are going to take this one. I think it's going to be a tougher game than people think.
Yeah,
I'm concerned about the slot defender. I think the Eagles can handle this defensive line. I think the receiving game is really my biggest issue right now. Can the Eagles stop these receivers? I saw what they did to Chicago last week. Obviously, the Eagles got a better defensive line, get pressure on Baker, and make him throw the ball erratically. But there you have it, folks, from Clay Harbor and Greg Cosell on Inside the Bird Networks. That was Inside the Tape. We talked about last week's games. We gave you guys a preview of what to expect this Monday at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa Bay. And a lot of what we said last week really did come to fruition and were the key matchups. So make sure you guys stay tuned in, and we'll see you all again next week. Fly Eagles fly.